Okay, hi everybody. I guess we'll get started. I'm experimenting with starting on time and ending on time. See how that goes. It's never been done before. My name is Troy Dreyer. I'm the Senior Associate Editor for streamingmedia.com and onlinevideo.net. And I'm very glad you could all join us. We're talking about DRM, and according to our program, DRM is no longer a dirty word. As a video consumer, I didn't know we were happy about it now until I read this. Apparently, video consumers are no longer bothered by it. I guess BitTorrent has gone out of business. But we're going to be experimenting and seeing if this description is true in this panel. Is DRM no longer a dirty word? Are we finding new approaches that make it seamless for the viewers and the buyers? And have we finally entered into DRMs that are not restrictive and that will be so invisible that people won't even be bothered by them? Joining us today, we have Christopher Schouten, Senior Director of Solutions Marketing for Irdeto. We have Sven. Sven, how do you say your last name?
Slazenger.
Slazenger, CEO of is it pronounced Interlake?
Interlake, yes.
Interlake. And there's one change in your program. Gulliver Smithers is joining us from Base 79 instead, and Gulliver is the new CTO. I understand you've only been with the company a few days now.
Correct.
All right, so he's new, so go rough on him. It's going to be trial by fire. I'm going to introduce the panelists one by one, and they can say a few words if they'd like. Christopher?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Schouten. Irdeto is a company that's based in the Netherlands and China with offices all over the world, and we are mostly involved in helping studios, pay TV operators, and over-the-top operators monetize their content with, I guess that was me, sorry.
That might be me.
Might be neat.
Monetize their content with security and content management technologies. So we have major customers in the security space like Comcast, Netflix, Sony, Toshiba, who are all using our dynamic security solution that I'll share with you on a video in a little while or whenever you want me to. And we have sort of a different philosophy and a different take on DRM and think some new things need to be happening in the industry.
Oh, go ahead and share it now.
Okay, I have to run over there and pop it up then. So just to put this into context, the DRM industry for a long time has been sort of the philosophy of let's put our best foot forward and our best solution out there and then stand back and sort of hope that it works without much of a strategy about how do we take care of it over time. If it gets hacked, what's our strategy? What do we do? How do we fix it so that our revenue doesn't drop off? So this short 90-second video just explains our philosophy of dynamic security, and I hope you enjoy it. So Mark, if I can have the sound on this.
A static security solution may provide your service with the minimum level of protection required for launch, but can it stand up to attack over time? And if it is compromised, will your security vendor even know before it's too late? And how will they respond? ActiveCloak for Media's dynamic security solution provides you with a smarter and more holistic approach to protecting your service, your content licenses, and ultimately your brand's reputation. We start by working with you to design your product with the industry's best initial attack resistance, recognized as the gold standard for DRM robustness by Hollywood. But the real test of your product's security comes when it has to face the harsh realities of a cruel world filled with pirates and hackers. That's when the ActiveCloak agent starts to defend your app against attack all by itself, using advanced anti-tampering techniques. At the same time, our ever-vigilant team of investigators will be watching and defending your service by monitoring the internet for attacks, even when those are just still in the planning stages. We then analyze them, propose and deliver countermeasures before the enemy has a chance to do serious harm. That saves you embarrassment, potential loss of revenue, upset content providers, and angry customers who are paying for your service while the bad guys are watching for free. Dynamic security, only from Irdeto ActiveCloak for Media. Pioneering security, securing pioneers.
Red Bee Media,
is one of the world's leading media management companies, providing multi-platform technology and creative solutions to broadcasters, content creators, content rights holders, platform operators, and brand owners. Our industry is rapidly evolving, with new technologies and platforms offering more and more opportunities to engage and interact with audiences. In response, we have embarked on a journey of discovery into what the media landscape might look like.
For complicated web applications, and when the online video streams started growing and the bandwidths were available, of course, always also with online video projects, and we're doing that for customers in over 35 countries now. We have offices in Munich and Berlin in Germany and in Jacksonville in Florida. We're a fairly small company. We're just about 20 people doing that. But we're not the ones building the car. I always say we're only working on the engine. That's also why we're completely invisible. We have projects running with us like Audi Television worldwide, or the global streaming for the Deutsche Bank group portals, McDonald's in the German-speaking countries, and so on. And of course, we're coming from the browser-based side, not the connected TVs and the devices. It's slowly growing into that. We're more coming from the website, web content fraction here. And of course, many of our customers have problems or questions about DRM integration for live streaming, for on-demand streaming. And not all of them work with Hollywood content, and that's the interesting point that we're probably going to get to later on.
Very good. Gulliver?
Hi, I'm Gulliver Smithers. I'm the CTO of Base 79. Base 79 basically represent the rights holders directly and monetize their content on platforms like YouTube. I've been in the job 2 days, as Troy I've been in the job 2 days, as Troy kindly pointed out. And my appointment, my remit, is really to take that vision multi-platform. So we're distributing content directly for rights holders across multiple platforms and monetizing it.
Now, for those who haven't heard of Base 79,
was called My Video Rights, have recently branded to Base 79. I think we've been around for 3 or 4 years, based in London, and have an office in New York as well.
and does that name mean a shift in what you do? The old name was so clear.
Yeah, I think initially when the company was formed, the aspiration was around user-generated content, but I think if you look at what's going on YouTube and on the web generally, user-generated content is kind of falling out of favor. Longer form, more professionally presented content is easier to monetize and is becoming more popular with viewers.
Very good. Well, let's start out just kind of taking the temperature of where DRM is, where it has been. Let's kick it a little bit and find out why people didn't like it. You know, what has historically been the problem that we're talking about fixing?
Well, the problem has clearly been the fact that when any technology restricts people's enjoyment of media, and let's face it, at the end of the day, media is about enjoyment, then we've got a problem. And when it restricts it in a way, especially that impacts legitimate paying customers, then that's completely unacceptable. So I think the shift that we've had is now that the bandwidth has increased globally, that codecs and smooth streaming technologies are much more mature than they were several years ago. We're moving a lot more towards streaming. And streaming, with streaming, DRM becomes much more transparent, because what you're doing is authenticating and encrypting each individual stream on each individual device that you play it back from. And that's a relatively seamless experience for a consumer. If you download a file and then you try and pass it around from device to device, that's when you start getting mostly in trouble with DRM restrictions. So I think the move to streaming is one of the major things that's probably reduced the concerns somewhat related to DRM, because it's made it more transparent, like it should be.
Very good.
I think there are different perspectives to DRM. One is, if I'm a user, of course, as you mentioned, I want to have a good user experience. I don't want to hassle around with the stream, download additional plugins and software and so on. And then there's the perspective of the average customer that approaches us with all these questions and say, well, I want to deliver DRM secured content. Now, I'm not really sure what that is, and I think it's very intransparent and technically complex, and can you please help me doing it? I need DRM, but they don't really know what they need. Do they need only content protection? Do they need authentication? In which level do they need it? What kind of budget do they have? That's when the difficult part really starts, especially on the browser-based, or now obviously also mobile device-based platforms. And that's when it gets complicated, and when many of the potential customers, especially those that don't have a big budget and that are not delivering Hollywood content, then say, well, maybe I'm not doing that project at this time.
Okay. Gulliver?
Yeah, I think that traditionally DRM and prior to that CA were very much barriers to entry to content distributors distributors. And the mystification of DRM, the poor understanding, and I could probably list 16 or 17 different ways of protecting your content on a PlayStation, on a tablet, or something like that. It confuses people, and I think it's used as a barrier to entry. It feels to me a little bit like the PC security market 6 or 7 years ago. My mum would ring me up and go, "What's Norton?" There needs to be some clear steer on standards and a clear steer on what the continuum is, depending on the value of the content. Really. So I think that it needs to be more transparent, it needs to be simpler, and that is emerging, which is a good thing.
And what have been the historical problems that we've had with it that need revision now, that it's perhaps gotten in the way?
I think patchy adoption by studios. So often content distributors are largely driven by what the studio will accept. And so if I go onto my Love Film subscription on my PlayStation, there'll be some movies missing because Warner doesn't like PlayStation, or Fox won't approve the DRM, or whatever it might be. That's very difficult to explain to a consumer when you're trying to get them to give up on a shelf full of DVDs and move into the future. It has to be better than the past. And if I can't access my content on all my devices, it feels to me like there's friction there, and therefore I'm going to say, I can get an unlocked copy of this online if I spend an afternoon searching on time sites. So I think making that frictionless thing is
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have very close ties with the studios, and we don't see much movement at all in that area in the studios with regards to loosening up on the restrictions. As a matter of fact, I think what we've talked about so far is just SD content. I think when we move to HD, things get even worse because Hollywood is currently talking about primarily a hardware security focused approach to at least premium studio content, which is going to make life very difficult in a very app-based world today. So clearly we have to come to some solutions around that and strike some smart compromises between the technology providers and the studios. Otherwise, consumers aren't going to get the seamless experience that we're talking about.
One thing I've always been confused about when we talk about DRM is the music studios really gave up on it when they allowed Apple to sell tracks completely uninhibited, unencumbered with DRM. And that was celebrated, and we all feel better for it, and we buy our decently priced tracks online rather than pirating them. Why will that never happen with premium video content? Why is it so different?
I think the value of a single song is 99 cents, and the value of a movie is $14.99 to $19.99 or more. Especially as we move into HD, it's even more than that. I don't see any willingness from the studios to back off of that at this point, and as a matter of fact, they're only tightening their requirements in many areas. For instance, distribution of theatrical release window content to pay TV operators in the US. So day and date release on your satellite dish of something that comes out in the theater. There they've upped to the security requirements where you've got to plug the analog hole and do output control, you've got to do watermarking, and it's gotten extremely complex there. So unfortunately the studios are the providers of all these wonderful videos that we're watching, and that gives them a lot of rights to say in ways that we're not very happy with sometimes how we can use that content.
Are they calling the shots for the whole industry then?
Well, they're certainly calling the shots for the part of the industry that they control, which is movies. If you look at TV networks, that's a much different story, obviously, because the sort of shelf life of their content has sort of a funny dip to it. So before it comes out, if you were able to get a hold of it before broadcast, it would have extremely high value. But no one's really doing that today for most intents and purposes. There have been experiments. The second it hits the airwaves, it loses a lot of value because it's out in the public domain, especially if it's free-to-air broadcast. But then after a while, when it goes into sort of the long tail and archive, then it has value again because this is where traditionally people buy the DVD sets and things like that. So that's a completely different dynamic than the studios, and they're sort of calling their own shots there as well. But for some reason, the studios seem to control the agenda to a large extent. I'm not sure why.
I think it also depends on the kind of content that we're really talking about. Just as you said, comparing the movie industry, which obviously are very far away from going to similar models like we've seen with MP3 audio, to television stations. For example, the major German public broadcasters comparable to the BBC here in the UK, ARD and ZDF, in their web TV media centers, Now, they are streaming only their own produced content due to rights issues, due to DRM issues as well. But they're doing that without a real DRM solution implemented, because, well, they say, okay, we're streaming it over, now I'm getting a bit technical, sorry, we're a very technical company. They're streaming it through RTMP Flash Media Server, because it's a bit harder to record than progressive streaming, and because it saves bandwidth for long-form content, because you only pay for what the user has actually seen and nothing's downloaded in the background. But they decided that this is the barrier they want to stay with. They do not need, they figured out they do not need a more expensive a DRM solution for that content, because it's been paid for by the viewers due to the broadcasting fees that you have to pay in Germany anyways, and like that it should be available without a DRM implemented system. And then you get down to, if you go down the steps further, we have a customer, and that's a very good example that I always like to mention when it's talking about DRM. Photo TV, they're called, is with an F, phototv.de. They're making how-to clips for for a special interest group, photographers. How do you light a face? How do you control exposures, and so on? It's about 15 minutes clips that he provides on the platform, and it's very popular amongst the German photographic community, and he's charging a subscription fee of 5 or 10 euros a month, and obviously he has an interest that nobody's downloading these clips and then posting them in all the different discussion forums. So he is always looking for a DRM system, but for a DRM system that he can afford. Now he's using Flash for streaming to a Flash-based player, so we've been talking to him for a long time about Flash Access, the DRM solution that Adobe offers that seamlessly integrates in the Flash player. Nobody needs to download additional plugins and so on. But it comes as a price tag for the license and for the implementation. It just is too high for such a small special interest portal. So currently, I mean, we made a workaround for him with time-based tokens that expire, with the Swift Flash verification, with RTMPE encryption, to encrypt the stream. But of course it is a workaround. The content itself is not encrypted, and you will always find tools that enable you to record or screen capture or so on content like that. But for him, that barrier is currently high enough because it is within his budget. So that's also what that's probably the majority of browser-based web TV offerings that are looking for DRM solutions. Probably only a fraction of you in the audience are dealing with Hollywood content. And a larger portion in the audience is dealing with websites that are somewhere between the TV approach and the photo TV approach that I just mentioned. And I think we're still missing some solutions in that lower price segment as well, especially for the people that are producing platforms like photo TV.
I like that you're bringing up the smaller producer, because when we talk about DRM, I think people naturally think about Hollywood.
They always talk
its
about
own
Hollywood.
interests.
Yeah.
And really, there's a lot of people who want to create videos for sale, how-to, instructional, create their own mom-and-pop type store, and they can get ripped off just as easily.
There are studies in the US that now show that the for-pay content segment that is growing most quickly are these how-to videos, usually on a subscription-based model, just like the photo TV guys doing. And
So
they need, obviously they need some sort of lower priced DRM solution that is somewhere below a Flash Access from Adobe or Verimatrix or whatever is out there.
Did you want to add something, Oliver?
Well, there was a question actually. Is this working? Is it on? Yeah, good. It was a question about, it was actually to yourself, Christopher, about where you see DRM services evolving, because last year what I was looking for when I was trying to protect content for my previous employer was a cloud-based DRM service that I would pay to use, because in previous years we'd had a Microsoft Play Ready thing, and it involved a cupboard with £250,000 worth of equipment and licenses sitting in it that we needed to manage for ourselves. I can see there being an emerging market for people who want to just have cloud-based DRMs which they pay for on a use basis and don't involve that initial investment, but I don't know if that actually has evolved in the market yet, or if it's something that
it's not something that we're dealing with directly, because we deal mostly with larger pay TV operators and over-the-top operators. But I can imagine that there are some issues related to that are probably primarily on the legal side, regarding some things I know some of our friends in the audience are probably very familiar with about liabilities related to running a DRM server.
Yeah.
And for a third-party service provider to offer sort of a cloud DRM service, it would require them most likely to assume some of those liabilities, and for a lot of companies, they're not capable of assuming that from a legal perspective. So another dimension. We've got the contractual perspective, we've got the technology perspective, and we have the legal perspective.
But do you see DRM for what you would call maybe second tier rights? I don't want to call kind of HBO box sets long tail because they're not, but they're not premium movies. They're not £15 on the point of release or whatever it might be. Do you not see that those people need some form of protection, which isn't studio grade, but is enough of an inconvenience to stop viewers going and finding this stuff for free online, because everything is available for free online if you've got the time to look for it?
Well, what I do know is that the only thing that will have ever a positive impact on piracy is by offering these kind of legitimate services that you're talking about, because we've seen, for instance, in the US, as bandwidth has gone up, as Netflix has gotten more and more popular, the number of movies that have been downloaded by BitTorrent has actually started to level off if you look at the last 3 or 4 years. So I don't have a technology answer to your question, Gulliver, but what I do know is that we have to solve the problem, because the only way to cope with piracy is you can throw as much technology as you want at it, people will still get around it at some point. The only thing we can do is offer them a legitimate alternative, and it has a positive impact when you do.
I just want. Sure, I'll take a question.
You mentioned Netflix.
Yes.
Obviously, their position with you. What kind of strategy on DRM do they have, and what do they use? And do you have any insight to that at all?
Well, what I'm aware of is that they have a sort of two-tier strategy with how they address devices. They have strategic devices that they themselves go after integrating. And their preference with those always seems to be a Microsoft-based solution, at least historically it has been. They have a second tier then approach where they'll let an individual company, like let's say for instance Boxy and D-Link, integrate the Netflix service on their box in order to help them sell more boxes. But Netflix doesn't consider that strategic. In that case, what they often do is they come and they work with us to implement a hardened and robust version of Windows Media DRM or PlayReady, protected by the ActiveCloak technology I was talking about before, and then get that certified by Netflix. There are situations, obviously, on connected TVs especially, where the connected TV manufacturer has embedded a particular piece of security technology like Widevine into the TV, and in that case, then I believe they leverage that as well. So really, I think key also to this whole discussion is if you're a large provider and you need to address multiple devices, most of which are not under your control and not all reachable with apps in which you've baked your security in, then how can you have at your server side or your head-end side control technology that can manage multiple DRM seamlessly? That's something else we do as well.
Okay. I want to mention, Sven, you mentioned before you weren't sure how technical to get. These audiences, what I find, they love technical detail. They're hungry for specifics. Go ahead and give them specifics, because they're going to ask it in the questions if you don't. They love it. So the DRM industry, I think so far we've seen a lack of standards, right? And that's created problems for consumers in getting access to their device, their videos in different ways. As we get into the mobile revolution now and people want ubiquitous access to their content, what needs to change?
There has been a session yesterday that I sat in. I think it was Jan Ozer talking about the different video standards and codecs and so on. And he described a situation that in terms of streaming formats and codecs and so on, especially on mobile devices and on connected TVs, pretty much described the same scenario that we have on maybe on a smaller scale and variety in the DRM sector as well. The market of technical solutions is too fragmented, and there really is no standard that we can use to implement a solution that's really running everywhere. And I mean, there are certain companies going that way and taking on that approach, but they usually need to be somewhere embedded in an application from themselves that is running on the connected device, whatever it may be. And many of the hardware producers will not allow it. Still going their own way and implementing their own standards and so on. The same way as it was with the how do I get on an over-the-top TV set. I mean, in Germany now, the HBB TV standard finally, all the manufacturers said, well, no way with Samsung and LG, and everybody wanted to do their own thing. Now finally they say, well, okay, maybe we integrate HBB TV. Now we're slowly seeing something that is moving towards standardization in certain segments of this market, but it has not arrived at the DRM front yet, at least from what we see. But probably it's going to go down that road, but probably it's going to be 2 or 3 years until we get there.
Gulliver?
Well, I think to touch on the point with HBB TV, I think the underlying problem there is that there isn't an open standard DRM necessarily.
Yes,
so
no.
bad, but you can't adopt, or there'll be nervousness around adopting Adobe as a standard for a country or for a particular market or a particular platform, which is exactly what the problem we've seen with UV, where it took them a long time to finally decide to use Marlin. But this wasn't. It was not an easy decision to make. So I think that the problem with DRM is it's sort of philosophically doesn't lend itself to becoming a standard, if you like.
But I would argue that by the same token that there are companies like Viasat, for instance, who are doing a very excellent job of looking at the reality of their marketplace, saying we have connected TVs, we have Android, we have iOS devices out there, we have PCs we want to provide a video to, and have made very successful moves towards becoming very serious multiplay operators by embracing perhaps multiple DRMs or multiple security standards, and then just managing those effectively from the head end. I'm not saying that that's easy or that's trivial at all by any stretch of the imagination, but there are many companies out there that are doing this very successfully and giving their customers as a result a pretty seamless experience through a simple download and authentication type process. And I can't go into the specifics about the different technologies they're using because it's not my place to talk about, but they're managing their complexity very well.
But by handling that many different technologies under the hood and managing them, that certainly is a good approach for those that offer premium content and can afford that solution, because interconnecting all these different technical solutions comes at a certain price tag.
It does.
So
And creates a small industry.
and creates a very small industry. Yes.
Well, but
Not so small.
But by the same token, I mean, I do understand the scalability question,
Yeah.
but there is a reality out there today that consumers are adopting a huge variety of different devices, and it's a reality that we all have to learn to cope with somehow. Now, if you have more money to throw at the problem, obviously that's ideal. Hopefully we can find a way to make that scale down and meet the needs of smaller providers as well.
Well, I'm hearing a lot about costs here. I mean, do you have to be a Hollywood studio to make this happen? Are there affordable options out there for people who just, want to get started on their own?
That's a classic "it depends" question. Going back to the photo TV guy I just mentioned, when from somebody in that scale and with that budget, the question about DRM comes, we always sit down with them and we talk to them and say, well, what do you really want to avoid? What is the technical barrier that you think about implementing? Of course, in the beginning of the discussion, they say, well, we want to be as secure as the Netflix thing. And when we tell them about the price tag, and we say, well, maybe there is another alternative. We just want to somehow have a certain level, a certain technical barrier that for the standard user out there, we just want to prevent them from downloading it. Now, everybody knows how easy it is to download a video clip from YouTube. There are a zillion tools and plugins for Firefox and so on to just download progressive video. So that is the most simple way of distributing video, but it's the easiest way to copy it. And then you can already, before you implement a real DRM system, you already can take certain steps by, first of all, using a streaming protocol, which makes it a bit harder to download the content. Then you can implement token-based systems, which you can very easily either do yourself or have your technical service provider do for you. When you're using Flash, you can use the player verification, where certain content is, where your content is only played to a certain player, and if somebody sniffs the URL and wants to play it with their player, it just will not play. And so on. So there are certain measures that you can use that are usually implemented within the streaming server technologies, whatever they may be, themselves, or which you can build around by using the frameworks that Adobe or Wowza or some of the others provide, which are not yet a real DRM system, but which come below the price tag that, for example, a rather simple Adobe Flash Access implementation, where you would need an encryption server and maybe an additional playout server with the licenses and integration, you at least have to spend 50,000 euros to get that running. Now that is beyond the budget of many of the smaller web portals. So usually they will adapt one of the solutions below that, and it just is always the question, what is the technical barrier that I can provide with the budget I have for securing a content solution?
Mm-hmm. Did you want to say something, Oliver?
I just think at that lower end of the market, what you're doing is trying to make it inconvenient for people to try and steal your content, not to prevent them. Because you know, I can go and get Avatar today for free on the web, so it's clear that whatever protection that has been around Avatar historically hasn't really worked, but it takes greater and greater amounts of resources to crack that stuff. So, you know, for the casual user who just doesn't want his videos around, you know, the services he provides in his shop appearing on his rival's shop, then you just make it as inconvenient as you can, I guess. I mean, that's the kind of longer tail argument.
Well, that's definitely the one solution. The other solution is to try and add as much value as you can to the experience of that content. So that's always sort of been the value prop of DVDs and now Blu-ray, where you would be able to have bonus content available to you that wouldn't be necessarily available in what you would download. Now with applications on smartphones and tablets, you get a lot more richness. You get connection to the internet, so you can find contextual information. You can take polls. You can get deeper content information about, you know, an artist or a actor in a film. So if we can create a better user experience around the content, in addition to protecting it, that's another form of protection, really.
Do the consumers want that? Do they just want the video or the TV show or the movie? Do they want the quizzes and the online access?
I think we're moving into an era, Troy, where we're going to start seeing a new segmentation of consumers based on that question. So there's always going to continue to be a segment of consumers who we call the happy zappers or the TV traditionalists. All they want is a linear TV show. They're perfectly happy with it. We've given them PBRs now, so that's really great, and that's enough. But there's another segment, the media 3.0 pioneers, we call them, that want that control of the experience. They want it on multiple devices. They want social interaction around that content. They want depth of information and metadata around that content, so they can really have a deeper interaction with what they love. We have to cater to both of them.
Is that a fairly small niche?
We've done polls at major trade shows in the past, and there's actually 4 different types to that paradigm. And what we're seeing is an increasing move towards a even 25% split among all those different types. And granted, we've done this at media trade shows, so there's a bit of a skew in the data. But we're seeing, you know, the majority of people still being very much in the TV traditionalist space, and some of the digital dabblers, which are the guys who don't have a huge interest in content, but if they do, it has to be on their terms because they're not going to waste their time with linear TV.
I do question the source of those polls. My mom did not go to the media trade shows.
No, we also have our own consumer community that that is much more evenly and fairly split, and the results are very similar. So I think we as an industry going forward will have to deal with the fact that we have different types of consumers who we're going to have to scale the experience for as well. But I think that's more the topic of the next conversation. So I'll stop stealing Vanessa's material now. She's giving me dirty looks.
Well, Sven, you already mentioned a price tag for something, and I'm glad you did, because I wanted to get into that. I know you guys hate to give firm price tags, but they want it, so I got to ask. Let's go with the different levels and tell people, for this level of inconvenience or protection, whatever you want to call it, what can people expect for startup costs? What would the lowest level of inconvenience be? Is it for Flash?
Well,
Flash access?
based on the browser-based distribution, now it gets more complicated when you start targeting mobile devices and so on. Let's start with the browser-based scenario, where the easiest is upload your videos to YouTube. Doesn't cost you anything, not even streaming. The next is, okay, maybe I want it within my own controlled environment. I want to stay in control of my content, upload it, and I want some sort of entry-level protection. The easiest form of protection can be, but it's very simple to copy or download because there are tools out there that can grab it as well, is to use a streaming protocol. It's the smallest barrier. It doesn't really even cost much more than using a progressive stream. But also, just Google for RTMP sniffer or RTMP downloader or so on. You will find them. if you know what to search for, you will find them, you can download them, and you can use them to record an RTMP stream for Flash, for example, as well. The same is out there for Windows Media and so on. So the next step, adding additional logic, authentication logic to it, server side and also player side. It's very easy to do with Flash because you're working in a controlled environment where you already have a plugin installed in almost every browser out there across different platforms, Macintosh, Windows, Linux systems, and so on. So you can use Adobe's Flash Media Server with the server-side logic that you can script server-side, and the Flash player that can do much more than just display video, that can interact with the logic that the server has. There you can use token-based systems, you can use the player verification and so on. Player verification is something that does not necessarily have to cost much more if your streaming provider supports it.
Give me some costs here.
Highwinds, for example, supports it. It doesn't cost anything because you can just do the Swift verification by yourself by just uploading your player file there, and it will do a check, is it the same player, and then stream the content. Now, if you don't have a provider doing that, you may have to buy your own Flash Media Server for several thousand euros and install it somewhere. Maybe that's not the way you want to go because you don't want to fool with running servers. But there are providers out there like Influxes in the US or ourselves in Europe and others that do Flash Media Server hosting that you usually can talk to for individualizations like that, because that's what they usually do for their customers. Now, when it comes to a project where you implement a token-based authentication system that somehow interconnects with an existing user database that somebody has, usually the people that we're talking to, they already have a user base, they have a website, they have a web application. The data is already there. You just need to connect it to the media server environment and the server-side application running there, because they usually already have a shop where they can say, okay, user Troy has already paid for this month, so he can access that page. And I just want to make sure that on the page he can access within the website the video that he sees, that first of all only he can see it, and that he can't copy it. And I can use certain steps to implement that. And they were talking several thousands of euros, depending on how complicated it is. And
is that a startup cost or monthly?
Usually you only have an integration cost that is somewhere below implementing a Adobe Flash Access solution and somewhere above just booking a streaming service. And there really is a wider range because it really depends on each project. But we're usually talking about somewhere between 5 and 25,000 euros, depending on the complexity. Now, of course, it can be more expensive as well, but usually customers that bring that kind of budget also have different requirements about the content, and they need a somehow certified solution, and that's when you have to go to the vendors that have the studio stamp authorized for this and that, and implement that kind of solutions, and that I already mentioned now where it can start in an Adobe environment. Now, that's only web TV, browser-based. I cannot use that solution for transmitting the same content to mobile device.
Okay.
I could maybe for an Android, because there is a Flash player out there, but it's no fun using it because it eats up so many resources on the Android phone, and it's complicated to use, and and it's not available on the iPhone. Now, Adobe they sent out a press release with a new Flash Media Server 4.5, now supports encrypted streaming for iPhone. Yes, the stream is encrypted between the server and the iPhone, but there is no real authentication logic or anything because the player on the iPhone just simply doesn't support it. So that's not really the same protection that you get from delivering something to a Flash player. And that's when it gets complicated, and that's when you can't use these simple workarounds anymore. And that's when you have to think about also sometimes integrating different vendors and so on. So that's basically where it ends with the smaller steps you can take. But usually that's also when we're talking about content providers that have premium content that need to target these audiences. Bringing the photo TV example again, he wants to deliver to the iPhone because he has requests from people wanting to view it on the iPad or iPhone, and he currently with these workarounds doesn't have a solution for it. But then again, he also says, well, how many requests did I get the last year? 4 or 5? Maybe it's not really worth thinking about a technical solution to bring that to the iPad for that small fraction of users that is currently viewing that content on mobile devices. Maybe that's a different story in 2 or 3 years when more people are consuming video content on mobile devices. But currently, he also says, well, 98% of my users are using a browser.
Well, shouldn't he be thinking
So-
about mobile now?
He is thinking about mobile, but there just is no affordable solution for him currently. He would have to pay more for it, but for a smaller platform like he operates, it's not worth it.
So what is the minimum price for a studio approved solution for a bigger player? Where does that start?
There usually is more to it than just implementing the DRM system.
Yeah.
As you just mentioned before, with all the other metadata and social integration and so on that comes with it. So there's a lot more around that, and that's probably also why it is so hard to answer anything that goes beyond that. Okay, how much does it cost to integrate a simple, for example, Adobe Flash Access solution? Because when it comes to all the other things around it, it depends on what the customer really wants, what is there, how many different systems you have to integrate, and so on. So that's hard to answer.
I think if you add all of the elements up of, a Microsoft or a Widevine licensing, a license server, not including the hardware, just the licenses itself, plus the cost of implementing that security into a mobile application, et cetera, then you're already about probably around 300K US, I would imagine at that point. And then above that, then of course there's the per license costs when you're actually serving the video. So it is a solution that really is unfortunately scaled primarily for bigger players at this point, because you're starting to get into the entry costs of probably about $500,000, and then beyond that you've got the ongoing costs associated with it as well, which means there has to be a solid revenue stream or a solid business case behind it to justify the business case.
So besides the expense I'm hearing, it sounds like implementing these is tremendously difficult. I mean, it sounds like to integrate it with your systems.
I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I mean, obviously, Microsoft does seem to be one of the preferred solutions by the studios, and they have a relatively strong media customer user base out there that is successfully implementing their DRM technology even on Apple devices. And we've done that for a lot of our customers. Comcast in the US, for instance, doing Windows play-ready protection to an iPhone or an iPad using smooth streaming also from Microsoft to get the quality of service for the video. And then in the actual application itself in a protected environment, turning that, transmuxing that into MPEG-4 so that it can be played back in hardware on the iPad.
Gulliver?
And I would agree with the cost projections, but I think the other thing you need on top of that is relationships with studios to clear rights. You need an in-house person who keeps an eye on these things and works out which DRMs are falling in and out of favour and what updates are coming and what new devices they'll go on to. So I think the investment is quite significant, and it's one of the barriers to entry for the smaller players, I think, trying to get into this market, is that really it's for big TV companies and big movie distribution people to control the rights at that end of the market. And I think there is something missing at the lower end of the market for the smaller players or people who are recycling rights that have perhaps gone through their release period and are now several years old or something like that.
I feel like we should talk a little bit more about mobile, since that's just so much emerging right now. Are there specific security challenges in trying to have a multi-screen implementation?
There are in several different ways. One of them is the fact that not all DRM schemes can be supported on all devices. And we have the connected TV example we talked about earlier. Very difficult to address from a security perspective because most of the security is usually embedded in the firmware layer. So you have to use whatever is provided there. There's the challenges of, in a mobile environment, especially Android, of the lack of, or the openness of the device as a whole. So how do you deal with the fact, similar to a PC environment, that there's a lot of, if you do a threat analysis, a lot of points of attack there that have to be properly protected in order to not be able to allow for things like screen scraping, not being able to allow for extraction of content from the video bus. It's about 9 different points in a PC application and probably even more in Android. So I think those are the challenges, managing the complexity of multiple DRMs and managing security on the device itself to prevent a man-at-the-end attack, which is really the most common form of attack for extracting media today.
So without pushing ActiveCloak too much, what to you is the solution for dealing with multi-screen?
Obviously to work with us, but I think the more general answer to that question is, find a partner who you trust. We hope it's us. It could be somebody else. To help you manage the complexity of implementing on these devices. So find someone who has experience with implementing on all the devices that you think you might want to implement on in the coming 3 to 5 years, as opposed to just today's immediate needs. The risk is if you find someone to help you just today, then you're going to have to go to someone else to help you tomorrow. And that doesn't create the kind of partnership that you need long-term for managing security. In the end, it has to be a partnership, because security, if you're running a premium content business, has to be one of the top 3 or 4 concerns that you have as a company to remain viable.
We're hearing so much about ultraviolet right now, and but behind the closed doors, I don't really hear a lot of people expressing a lot of faith in it. Is it going to be major? Is it going to be a part of all our lives as we purchase premium content?
I love the concept behind ultraviolet, and Irdeto's been a member since almost the beginning. But for those of you who don't know it very well, I mean, it's all about being able to purchase content once from anywhere you want to, any retail outlet that's ultraviolet certified, and to be able to store those rights in the cloud for you to get access to them on whatever device you own. You can register up to 12 devices. You can share content among 6 different people in your household. So, your son, your daughter, your spouse, whoever buys a piece of content, you have access to that on one of your 12 devices as well. It's really about fundamental fairness to the consumer and trying to break through some of the aspects of unfairness that DRM always had associated with it in the past, by creating sort of an ecosystem where you can share content among a reasonable group of people. So I love the fact that it's a fundamentally fair consumer value proposition. It's supported by most of the studios, everyone except for Disney, who together with Apple sort of always have their own ideas about things. It's supported by most of the consumer electronics manufacturers, a lot of technology providers, a lot of pay TV operators. It has all the makings of a success. And so I'm not sure why there's this feeling of skepticism and resistance in the industry, but I sort of feel it too. I'd be interested to see how it plays out, but I think it would be to the benefit of all of us as consumers if something like that were successful. As one of maybe several different offerings. Maybe Apple will continue to be successful as well. I think that's great. I think there should be more than one player in the world.
Gulliver, do people have to choose at birth if they're going to go with Apple or go with ultraviolet? Are they going to lock in?
We were talking earlier, it's like, when you're about 21, if you meet someone but they happen to have an Apple ecosystem in their house, could you marry them? I think that, that seems to be, this could sort of vertical consolidation of studio rights, distribution rights, device integration, etc. I think it is a worry, and it's not ideal for the consumer. I think ultraviolet it shows some opportunity to get around there, but whether or not that takes off and is widely adopted and lasts forever, I'm sceptical. And I think that in 5 years' time I'll go, damn, I have to replace my entire content catalogue because I used that old ultraviolet format, and I'll store my password in the same box all my old DVDs sit in. It's almost like the industry likes to keep the consumer on their toes, really, but I don't think that's necessarily best for the whole ecosystem.
So I was kind of thinking about plays for sure when you were talking about that, and about getting locked into a DRM scheme and it going away. That didn't work out very well.
It's hard to make. It's hard to make predictions in an environment like this. Imagine 2 years ago, in the mobile space, there seemed to be only iPhones. Then Android came along, and within only half a year, I think, on the market, there were more Android operating systems out there than iPhone had at that time, and since then has surpassed that number. And who knows what's to come? And that's maybe also true for the road of video standards or DRM integration or how we get onto connected TVs in the living room.
Are you saying it could change that quickly?
So, well, we've seen it in the past.
Right.
It may happen again.
But I think what ultraviolet has in its favor is that instead of adopting one specific strict standard, they've taken a sort of ecosystem of different kinds of standards, so 5 different DRMs, a number of different codecs, support theoretically for any device out there. I think that's going to be the standardization of the future, is not this is exactly the way that we're going to do it, but rather these are several different good ways that are acceptable to do it in. And I think that'll give us maybe the flexibility we need that we haven't had in the past.
How much does it matter that the whole industry is going one direction and Apple Disney is going another? The consumer doesn't want that kind of confusion.
No, the consumer definitely doesn't want that kind of confusion. But for instance, there's no reason to say that you couldn't, on your Apple device, download an ultraviolet streaming player where you can get access to your content. Or maybe even sideload it at some point. So I think in an app-based world, it's creating a lot more flexibility where you can get around things like that and make it work. Just the same way, for instance, if you don't have an Amazon Kindle, dedicated ebook reader, then you download the app on your Android device or you download the app on your iPhone.
So as long as Apple approves the app.
Yeah, goodness knows what the restriction of the day is going to be, but it seems like that it's hopefully going in the right direction with more freedom as opposed to the opposite direction.
Well, let's check in with the audience and see if we have some more questions. Anybody? Give them a hard one. You?
At the end of the day, what's the sort of primary purpose of DRM? Is it to completely restrict people downloading, or is it to inconvenience them, like Richard said, or is it to, what's the goal of it?
To keep honest people honest, and to make sure that the content gets monetized so that the content creator can make more of it, really.
So then what's the purpose of DRM? Is it to inconvenience people, like consumers think?
Once again, it largely depends on the kind of content and the kind of project you have. For one customer or for one project, it may be to just inconvenience it to a certain level, and for the others is to just somehow keep that content safe that costs so much to produce in the first place and that you want to monetize. Now, there again, talking about barriers and coming back to the MP3 discussion, today I would not look for an MP3 again on Google and on some file sharing network because it just costs 99 cents. And it's more hassle looking for it than paying the 99 cents. I don't think we will ever come down to the 99 cents for a movie because it's just an incredible effort to produce a movie, and that price tag is not possible for the studios to offer. But will the price tag where we eventually end up for premium content be low enough to prevent us from saying, well, I don't want to pay these, I don't know, $10 or $5 or $3, and go out on a file exchange and dig for it? So currently the price tag is obviously still too high, so people go out and look for the content somewhere else. And DRM will never be able to completely secure content. Content will always find its way somewhere. If you look for it long enough, and if somebody's looking for it, somebody will provide it somehow. So DRM is always just a certain barrier that can be more secure or less secure depending on the budget you have. So,
and we have to make sure the value that we create around that content, ease of use, consumer experience, and the price, of course, is higher than the desire to circumvent the protection.
Exactly. Ease of use, very important point. Ease of use, the user experience. It's just so easy to go to the I use an Android iStore, iPhone, iTunes, to iTunes and download a file, and know where it is, and it's a click and ready.
Yeah, and I think that's where integrating these kind of content stores into connected TVs and game consoles and stuff like that is a good move, because it means that if you're sitting in front of that device and you have an impulse to want to watch something and buy something, then you don't have to run into the other room to your PC, start up BitTorrent, find the right torrent, download it, depending on your bandwidth, wait for 3 minutes or 3 hours or 3 days for it to download, and then watch it. We give people a high quality, easy way to find content and an impulse possibility to buy and watch it. That's going to make things a lot better for all of us, I think.
Golfer, you want to kick in?
I completely agree. It's about convenience and cost. I mean, I think that the Hollywood stuff is too expensive, and I think they'll go through a painful shrinking of the size of that industry in the way the music industry did. Music's not worse because of that. If anything, music's better. There's more of it live, and it's more accessible, it's more ubiquitous. So I think it's going to be painful for the studios, but really at the end of the day, they're protecting a middle management strata there, I think, at some level, and secondary rights exploitation. But I do think that the consumer wants it conveniently. Steve Jobs said about the music industry, if you're spending the afternoon downloading MP3s and adjusting the metadata yourself and transcoding them and setting their volumes and making sure it's the whole file. You're working for less than the minimum wage there. You know, you need to make it really convenient. You need to be able to just get onto any device. It needs to be ubiquitous, and you feel like you own it. You don't feel like it's locked away from you.
Another question in the back?
Yes, someone once said that if you're setting up an entertainment store, you wouldn't do it just purely thinking about shoplifters. You're thinking about legitimate customers. Does the panel feel that Hollywood studios, a little bit too obsessed in the digital world, they're building services purely thinking about shoplifters?
Hollywood currently is just as paranoid as the music industry was a few years ago, and they will probably hurt just as much as the music industry hurt a few years ago, I think.
Christopher, you deal with Hollywood?
I think they're in the process of feeling the pain. Blu-ray has given them a little bit of a boost because the format's doing relatively well in many regions, in Germany especially, it's doing incredibly well. But I think when that starts to decline and broadband continues to increase in penetration, consumers get more and more familiar with piracy, I think they'll start feeling the pain more and they'll have to adjust. Because I think they are in that mentality right now. They've got great stuff that the technology will support getting out to a wide variety of different devices, but they're so worried about locking it down, they won't let it out. And that's a frustration. I understand their viewpoint on the one side. They're a customer. We're trying to help them with our technologies to solve some of those problems. But on the other hand, you know, as a consumer, it's frustrating. I understand that.
Okay, I'd love to go one more. Yes? Hubert?
But again, are there sort of any objective proof that the development of DRM has actually, I mean, you spoke about the fact that BitTorrent is flattening out, and, you know, but I would argue that that's mainly because of Netflix and because of, you know, really
Yes.
good consumer propositions.
Yes.
So really, you know, this fantastic innovation in the DRM space, is that really sort of helping out or preventing or, you know, again, shoplifting focus versus really good store to actually have people come in? Where will that focus be going forward? You know, I mean, of course, you're in the DRM space, so you would hope that everybody will put a lot of effort into yours. But, you know, really, what is the future here? If it being innovative in the consumer position in order to reduce piracy and getting, rather than being extremely innovative in DRM?
The answer to your question is yes. There will always be a need for protection. For instance, DRM just isn't only about restricting content to unauthorized people. It's also about brand reputation. So look at what Sony has suffered from recently with their PlayStation Network problem. It's not only the tangible effect of having lost customer data, it's also the impact on brand reputation. So if I subscribe to Netflix and I'm paying my $7.99 or $14.99 or whatever it is these days per month, and the guy next door to me has hacked it and he's getting it for free, how's that going to make me feel as a legitimate customer about paying for Netflix? It's going to make me upset as well. So I've always argued that DRM is about content protection, but it's also about protecting your content licenses and not getting those pulled by the studios, as well as protecting your brand reputation. So I think all those three things are important. And yes, we absolutely have to continue the battle to provide a better and better consumer experience every day. Because in the traditional pay TV world, you now have two major competitors. You have Over the Top, who's coming in and causing some cord cutting and cord shaving in some regions, but you also have piracy. So consumers are these Media 3.0 masters I was talking about earlier, wanting to create their own custom experiences. And if we as legitimate providers don't give them that possibility, they'll go out and design it on their own.
Well, with that, I'm going to cut it off. If you have more questions for our panelists, feel free to come up and talk to them. Hand for our panelists. Thank you today for your Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Oops. Flew by.
Knocking over the microphone here. Sure.